Good to see everybody here this morning. I know our numbers are likely to be down somewhat. I was recounting that we are loath to ever turn folks away from a service, but we have to be able to assemble in order to assemble. I was remembering that when we had the snowpocalypse a couple of years ago that Kevin said, well, I'm going to go test out the roads, and he drove to the building, opened his car door, put one foot out the door, and went straight down onto the ground. And we don't treat surface roads here in Texas. They'll spray the overpasses. They're doing that this morning, but we don't treat the surface roads. So keep an eye on the calendar. Keep an eye on the weather for this afternoon. Make sure that you're not stepping out on a sheet of ice. I don't think we're going to see that. May see that tomorrow, but all indications are we're going to be just fine this afternoon. But again, if your mileage might vary if you live up north of town and in some of the higher elevations of the hill country. So, we are continuing in Titus chapter 1. We had discussed precisely one of the qualifications that Paul lists here for elders, the things that Titus is to look for in the men that he is to appoint. We discussed being above reproach. We're not going to revisit or recap all of that class. As we go through these, this is one of the areas of Scripture where there is the most potential for division in the Lord's body. People have very strong feelings on this topic. And when you couple strong feelings because of people's desire to do what's right, to do God's will, make sure that we have the right men serving. Folks that are older and have been around and were raised in the church have likely seen things that have informed their opinions on elderships. They have probably seen some very dark things as far as church splits, heard of them, witnessed them, been a part of them, been on one side or the other of them. And it is a fair statement to say that on a very fundamental basis, every church split can be laid one way or the other, at least in part, on that eldership. What could have been said that wasn't? What was said that shouldn't have been? What confrontations weren't had that should have been had? What confrontations were avoided that should have been explored? What anger was displayed and felt? Was there a lack of love and understanding and patience? There's a lot of things that go into that because leaders in any organization are going to be tested. But when that organization is one where souls are at stake, the stakes could not be higher. They could not be higher. So we do have a likelihood, or a possibility rather, the potential for a great deal of division if we are not careful and if we don't all strive to not only find common understanding for these things. We're not going to. We're going to have honest and sincere held beliefs that are not going to be in 100% accord. Last week I gave an example of just a hypothetical of a young lady that visits with us. Not a young lady, let's say an older lady that's been 30 years raised Episcopalian. And I gave the example that she comes to one of our worship services. She's been invited here by a friend, and she hears a gospel sermon. And she realizes that her infant baptism wasn't a baptism. She responds to the gospel. She is, in every way, when she comes up out of that water, a Christian. We would all agree with that, right? But she still holds all of those errant doctrines that she had learned over the last 30 years. She's still likely going to be a premillennialist. We haven't dealt with that yet. She's still likely to believe in original sin. She's still likely to believe in predestination or the chosen. She's going to believe in these fundamental tenets of Calvinism that she was raised in for the last 30 years. And how do we deal with that? Did we just say you're okay believing that error? No. So how do we deal with it? Well, we're dealing with it right now. We teach. We preach. We answer questions. We encourage anyone in that circumstance to have an open heart and mind. Right? They're still a Christian looking for the truth, and we need to be facilitating that truth in a way that allows them to hear it and learn. Our job is to teach folks that are in error. I'm saying this for a reason, because I'm about to say something controversial. Might lead to some meetings, hope not. So we'll do it. I think we're all sitting here right now saying, yes, we would teach that person in love for as long as it took and for as long as they had an open heart and mind. We will teach that person in love. But y'all, how often have we seen it to where we have some point of doctrine that we identify as being at odds with our brother, and we're not interested in teaching at all? You can't worship here. I've heard that. I've heard it many times. I've had family report it to me. Studied with a young man this last week who said the reason that he is in the very liberal assembly that he's meeting with is because he was told that his understanding about use of funds in the Lord's church was not compatible with the beliefs of where he was. He was told he was lost for that belief, and there's the door. So we'll tolerate somebody that's got premillennial views if they're a brand new Christian, views about predestination, all of the tenets of premillennialism. We're okay working through those for as long as it takes for somebody that comes to us with an open heart and mind. But if they disagree with us over a use of funds issue, they're dead to us. We need to think about that. Y'all, this congregation believes that the only authority that we have for using the collected funds that we generate on the Lord's Day that are contributed to Him and to His service are to be used to support the gospel and to care for needy saints. So if somebody comes to us and they are not a Christian, they are not a member of the Lord's body, we have people come up to this door frequently and they ask for help, and we meet with them. And if they're a member of the Lord's body, then sometimes we help them. Sometimes we give them a check and we write it from the church checkbook because they're a member of the Lord's body. We've got example for that. But if they come to us and they're not from the Lord's body, we pull out our wallet and we help them. But we don't do it with the Lord's funds because we are looking for proper authority. So let me just get that said. That is the position of this eldership, and we're going to continue to teach that in love. Believe that strongly. Should that be an identifier for a congregation? They're non-institutional. They're institutional. Think the Lord is pleased with labels like that? And why do we only label certain aspects of doctrine that we might have disagreement with? Why wouldn't we have a label for all of it? We are the label. Our lives are the label. What we say and do and teach others is the label. Let people draw their own conclusions based on us following the Lord and teaching what He has to teach us in love. And when we have disagreements with others on those points of doctrine, then we study them. We don't assail over them. And we need to keep that attitude in mind when we approach the topics that we're discussing this morning. All right, so we're going to dive right into it. Husband of one wife. What does that phrase mean? Seems on its surface to be easily understandable. Husband of one wife. Let's get the biggest ones out of the way first. Not a polygamist. He has one current wife. All right, so we're starting at the top of the funnel and we're going to work our way down. We have one and one wife only. Right? We're going to have, let's hope that we can get past the polygamy portion and we're all good with one wife currently. So we're starting with agreement. Can they be divorced? They have a first wife, now they have a second wife. Is that second wife a second wife? Now it gets a little more dicey, doesn't it? I'm not seeing anybody diving in on this one. What are y'all, chicken? Josh.
So this same term is used when describing a needy widow, wanting to be enrolled. And it uses the term having been the wife of one husband. So there was a qualifier added to it, having been. I mean, she can only have one. She can't have, have had a first husband, a second husband, a third husband. There's not a qualifier added to this. It just says the husband of one wife. So the way I understand it, and I've vacillated back and forth on this many times over the years, but my stance currently is the current husband of one wife. It could be a second wife if it's a scriptural divorce or if a wife passed away. But if he is currently married, now he has to be married. He can't be a widower and then.
We're going to circle back to that in a minute because that's another point of contention. You're right where I am on this. If a man has been, the Lord has made provision for what means a one-woman man or a one-man woman. We have provision for that, right? We have teaching on divorce and remarriage. Matthew 19 is clear with regard to when someone is able to remarry. They are on the innocent side of an offending spouse, right? And in such an occasion, that individual they're just simply married. They didn't choose the nullification of that marriage, right? Their spouse is the one that forsook them for another. Now, there are many that hold, and I have held for years, a more strict view of that. Because from a scriptural perspective, what Josh and I just agreed to, I believe that's scripturally sound. In practical application, is there truly ever an innocent party to a divorce? Something to think about. How does it get revealed? When does a prior marriage and the dissolution of that prior marriage start revealing things about the character of the innocent side of that? Say it happens twice. He's on wife number 3. Been cheated on by the prior 2. Scripturally remarried the 3rd time. Let's throw in another mix. We've got children from those prior 3 marriages. We're about to get into children being the fruit we are to inspect with regard to elders. At what point do you say that, you know what, when you've been married 3 times, let's call it 4. 3 offending spouses. Innocent side on all 3 of them? Are some folks going to start to question that? And does that fall into the category of reproach at that point? Right? If someone were put forward that had been in a prior marriage and that marriage ended because of the unfaithfulness of the put-away spouse, I would not object to that elder serving on that basis. But if that elder had, in the wake of those prior marriages, a slew of other issues, hard to avoid them in a circumstance like that. Kevin and then Bryce. Oh, sorry, Josh.
I was going to say, with the things that you're saying about it, like, I think what helps with understanding kind of all the things you're pointing out, like that it can become very dicey and everything, is like that is the result of sin in people's lives and in the world, that it can complicate things that, like you said, kind of reveal things about what are going on. And when we think about the qualifications of elders, it needs to be that we know these men and their families better than just on a surface level. I was reading, there's an article that Terry Slack wrote that was in the FC lecture book for the letters of Timothy and Titus that came out in 2009. And he made the point that the ones that we typically talk about, being married, having faithful children, that those are the easiest ones to do. Like, it doesn't take any special work to become married. You can find someone and be married, and you can have kids. And the other qualifications sometimes get overlooked because of that, because they're not as obvious necessarily. Which is why it has to be more holistic. You have to look at the man and his character and his life, both publicly and privately.
Completely agree. I mean, so many of these things are only knowable in discussion with the man, or an intimate knowledge of who he is and how he has lived his life. You've interacted with him to the extent that you know what he's about. And if there are areas where you're in the dark, he's a trustworthy source to question. You can believe him. You know, I've told this before, but I'm sure the individual wouldn't mind me outing him. But when my name was put forward, Bob Rogerson reached out to me and he said, "Hey, I'd like to visit with you about your qualifications to serve as an elder." I said, "I'd welcome that." And he said, "I'm going to send you a list of questions before we meet." It's a long conversation, and I loved it. I didn't love the experience of it. I loved his heart for wanting to be thorough and cautious, because he didn't know me as well as a lot of the folks that were in here. I thought that was very appropriate, and I love him for it. We are the ones to ask that information. Robert?
I was going to say, at the same time, from his point of view, because he didn't know you. And then from the other point of view of people that know you, or should know you, they should already know you by your fruits, basically. In other words, much time, I don't know how to put it, but
I think what you're getting at is we've got an example in 1 Timothy chapter 3 talking about deacons, that they should first be tested. And I don't think that means that we put them through a test. I think that means that their life is a test that we are to observe the results of.
Well,
Right.
I mean, you would have, most in the congregation would have already had spent time with you and already know who you are. You know what I mean? So they wouldn't have to get to know you from a personal aspect and then from that regard. And then when it comes to the seriousness of now trying to put somebody in the role of leadership, now you have to kind of make sure that you're not looking at it from the heart. You know what I mean? But you're looking at it from the scriptures.
Yes.
What God has said. So we don't want to confuse the heart, but the emotional part.
Because there's people that we love that might be put forward, but when you ask these questions about them, they can be uncomfortable for a number of reasons, right? Maybe they're falling short in some of those areas, and there's a concern about it. But we love them, and we don't want to confront that. We got to get past that because it's important. Bryce, did I ever come back to you?
Yeah, no, it's okay.
Okay.
start to understand and look at, okay, well, having a spouse provides these benefits for a man in this position. It gives them that understanding, it gives them that support, it gives them, you know, whatever the various benefits are. If you look at it and you can look at that elder and say, okay, this makes sense. The person they're with supports these ideas behind this. And we do have to be careful. I don't want to, you know, put things into scripture that aren't there. But I think there are obvious things where you're like, it makes sense for someone to be married. There's a reason God wants that.
I know David would agree. We lean on our spouses, right? We lean on our spouses. Michelle she's borderline psychic because I apparently I either wear my attitude on my sleeve, you know, when I'm having a rough day, but we can be driving in the car together. I'm unaware she's even paying attention to me, and she's like, all right, whatever it is, let's talk about it, right? She just knows. That was my next point. Can they be a widower? Come right to you, Kevin. Can they be a widower? This is an area, y'all, where there are, and again, people that have heartfelt, sincere beliefs can get to positions on this where they're not in agreement. This is one of those areas where there are men that I know and love that take a very studied opinion that if a man is married for 50 years and his wife passes away and he's been serving as an elder for 40 of those 50 years, that he wouldn't have to step down because he has shown that he is a one-woman man. There's biblical basis for that belief. I don't share that belief. If Michelle were to pass, I wouldn't be able to serve. For a number of reasons. I don't think I would be capable of it, is one of them, because I need her support in that role. Kevin and then Josh.
I was just going to say, you know, the actual statement there, man of one life, having one life, it's a very simple statement. Okay? All of the complications come in, as Josh mentioned just a moment ago, sin enters into it. And, you know, just a couple of things as I was listening to Bryce speak, and he pulled some of mine right out of my, I don't know how I know.
He does that a lot.
You know, what it does is it gives a man stability, okay? As you become older, you need that balance. You need that sounding. You need that wife. Not always, but, you know, that is in many cases the voice of reason. And if you have somebody that is on their second marriage, and I really see it as kind of a two-part. One wife, you're on your second wife, then isn't scripturally good with the Lord, okay? And I think that's the thing that always needs to be held up and looked at, and the goal is to be pleasing to the Lord. It shouldn't be, well, I want to be an elder, or I want to do this, or I want to do that. You know, I'm going to have to get with these people. You know, I've even seen in congregations where they start politicking to become an elder. And that's not right. That speaks to the heart of a man. If that's all he can think about is he thinks in his mind that that's my goal. I need to be. No, that shouldn't be the goal of every man. Other than according to the scriptures. If you desire the work, you want to do the work, then you have to meet the qualifications for the work. And where it gets mucky is man enters can become a real mess.
In a way, it helps me to go through the most distant extreme when I'm evaluating these verses. I did it a second ago with the multiple divorce situation, right? And the complications that can cause. I agree 100%, and this is where my views have moderated over the years just with study, and it came about from a different scenario than qualifications for elders. But if someone is free to remarry because their spouse has offended and they haven't, they're free. It's not free unless free. It's not free until they decide they want to serve as an elder. It's free. If they were able to remarry, then they were able to remarry, right? So, again, setting aside, just dealing with that one single tenet of doctrine, they're free. Now, does that mean that they're not entangled in other ways as a result? Could be. Josh, did you have one? And then Josh will come to you.
So the Greek is a one-woman man. One woman is in the genitive case, which means that she's possessed by the nominative case, man. So it's referring to someone who is currently living. Otherwise, you couldn't possess that person if they're dead. The other thing going along with that, in Romans 7, Paul uses the illustration of how death ends the bond between a husband and a wife as his illustration of how we died to the law and became alive to Christ. And he makes the point that if her husband's living, in verse 3 of Romans 7, she's joined to another man, she is called an adulteress. But if her husband dies, she's free from the law, so that she's not an adulteress, though she is joined to another man. So at death, that relationship is done. And so there isn't really anything in the text of what is written in Titus or Timothy that you could build an argument for saying a man who is widowed could continue to serve.
Totally agree with that view. Josh, did you have a
That
comment?
was the same point I was going to make, because I was going to add to it that these are all current qualifications, right? So when you're reading this and it says husband of one wife, that's a current. You can't say, well, I was not violent before, but I am kind of now, but I was before, so that's a past thing. Just like you can't say, well, I was married before, and it follows the same logic, I would think.
Well, to put one more logical point on that, to take this one to a logical extreme. Man is married, has a faithful marriage with his wife. It lasts a year because she's killed in a car accident. He spends 25 years as a widow or widower. Is he eligible to serve? Right? Yes, sir.
I'm hopefully not jumping ahead too much, but when you think about all these qualifications together, they have a purpose. What is the purpose of it? And you get down to the verse 8, where verse 9, where he says, holding fast the faithful word as he has been taught, that he may be able by sound doctrine both to exhort and convict those who contradict. A lot of times, as being elders, you're kind of seen as the operation managers of the congregation. You got to make sure all that stuff. When the main goal of the elders, especially in this context, Titus, is to keep sound doctrine in the congregation, because he was telling you need to set things in order, and then the first thing he said was elders, and it goes on in verse 10 talking about that.
Yeah, you're skipping ahead to where we're going to spend quite a bit of time. If we were to compare the lists that Paul provides us here and in 1 Timothy chapter 3, you would see missing, or you would see an addition in 1 Timothy 3 of apt to teach. You don't see it listed directly in that way in Titus 1. But what you just said, able to refute, convict, exhort, that's just another way of saying apt to teach, right? And willing to do so. And y'all, I'll come right to you, Robert. My view on apt to teach, and this is born both from study and experience. Teaching. Not simply able to do so, willing and doing it. So we'll circle back to that when we get there. We still haven't gotten to children yet. Robert?
So I'll bring that up in my point so we can keep moving forward. But I do think it's interesting, this concept that if you are an elder and you're an elder for 20 years and your wife passes away, I do think it's interesting in the text that Titus is talking about you need to put elders in place. So these are the starting qualifications. two things. Number one, if you have one child, right, it says children. So if you wanted to say you have to have two, you can't have one, right? Or you do have a child and you're okay with one, and 10 years from now that child passes away. Well, now they don't believe in children. You need to step down as an elder. So if you just want to take things to like the extreme.
You're jumping ahead because that's exactly what we're going to be discussing next. So were there any other questions or hands up that I missed? When I started this by saying that studied people with good, pure, sincere hearts can get to different places on these, you're seeing it now, right? This is exactly what we're talking about. And Josh's comment earlier about many of these situations, particularly with regard to husband of one wife, variances from that are born out of sin. And those are other things that are apparent that we've got to, that we're watching for, that we're looking for, right? Children who believe, not accused of dissipation or rebellion. Let's start with belief. I believe New King James and King James probably have faithful there. Let's just assume for the purposes of this discussion that we're talking about faithful children. Let's start with what it definitely means. Does it mean baptized believer? Yes. I think we can, hopefully we can get to a point of agreement on this meaning, baptized believing children. Now, how many? If I ask someone, do you have children? And they have a child, they're going to say, I have children. Right? We kind of have some finite nature to our language here. Do I believe that a man can serve with one faithful child if he has one faithful child? Yes, because he's the father of faithful children. Josh, did you have a question or a comment?
I was just going to say about the word pistos that's translated either believing, or faithful. It gets used a lot to refer to faithful Christians in other contexts. So I was looking at one dictionary, and it was saying that it's also used to refer to those who are Jewish Christians, those who are faithful to the Lord. And so the idea being that these are people who know the truth and are following the truth. Now, to the point about children, I agree that, you know, if someone were to ask you if you had children, you only had one, you would tell them, yeah, I have a child. You'd correct them, because it's singular, not plural. So I do see both sides of that argument, where, you know, I don't know that I'd have a problem with someone who had one child that was a believer serving as an elder, but it certainly would be even better if they had more than one.
Agreed. And I guess to qualify this conversation, at what point would I personally, or would you personally object to someone's name being put forward? I would not object over somebody being put forward if they had one child, because they failed the plurality of children test. I wouldn't. Bryce.
And Josh, correct me if I'm wrong, because I think you're more knowledgeable than I am on this, but if I look up that word, I see it used multiple times throughout Scripture, and it's used in context of, it could apply to a single child.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it talks about giving good gifts to your children. Well, that obviously...
Yeah, you're exempt if you've only got one. They're just out of luck.
Exactly.
Right.
And I mean, there's just verse after verse after verse after verse that you can continue to go through where you look at the context of those verses, it clearly applies to a single child or multiple children. And again, I'll go back to, why would God have this as a qualification? Well, the idea is that you are trying to see a man who can raise children to come to know God, who can teach those children, who can be an example to those children, who those children see a reflection of Jesus in their father and see the importance of following him, of, you know, becoming a Christian. Like, if we look under the surface and understand why is it here, I think it starts to answer so many of these questions.
Paul even adds some divine commentary to this exact point in 1 Timothy 3 by stating, because if a man can't rule his household well, how can he be trusted with the household of faith? Right?
I think
Rob.
You know, when you look at scriptures for what qualifies an elder, when you're looking at the family setting of the person that is potentially qualified, you look in Proverbs when it talks about a godly woman. One of the verses states that her husband trusts in her heart. And you know, I know just over the last 3 months, taking over a large role in what Charlotte has usually done, but because I want her to get better and rest, I see how important it is from that aspect, and all the deployments have been on, and her holding down the household, how important it is to have a godly woman in your household, because if your relationship with your wife is a spiritual one and it's based where it needs to be based, when that leader of the household, the man, is somewhere doing something where he's not with his family, he trusts that his wife is going to continue to focus on raising his children to be good, upstanding Christians or servants of God. And so when you look at all those things intertwined, no, I don't personally think that it's a multitude of children like what Bryce was saying. I agree with him on that point, on how we use the word children. But all of that stuff is intertwined. I know I've seen people in the military that have a dysfunctional household, but also usually cause a unit to be dysfunctional. I don't think elderships are any different if you look at their wife and their children, and how that family's put together. God knows that that's going to be a good indicator for congregations to look at that person and say, he would probably be a good elder.
I think those are all great points. You know, and your first point about as we move on from husband of one wife, the amount of burden that spouses carry for us is needed, first of all, and especially for somebody serving in a role like this, having somebody to share that load with, you know, just the household load is hugely important, so that those stressors don't add to the plate that the elders already carry. I want to make one point because it's one that I'm very passionate about, being the father of two. And being the father of two, and I'm somewhat glad that, you know, Coleman's going to be worshiping at Lavernia this morning, I believe. He may be here for services, I'm not sure. Difficult to serve as an elder's kid because we're told here and in 1 Timothy 3 that they are fruit that we are to inspect. So how do we determine if a child is faithful? This is where it gets touchy. And I will tell you, as an elder who has seen this, one of the reasons that Coleman is worshiping in Lavernia is because it is distracting from his Christian walk for him to have eyes at the back of his head that he feels constantly when he's here. Fair or unfair, he just does. And I do want him to be somewhere where he doesn't have to have that distraction from his walk of faith. So we need to be very cautious when we are measuring the faithfulness of somebody else's kid, that kid doesn't occupy a special office. There is no office of elder's kid. His walk of faithfulness for the Lord is identical to any other Christian's, right? It should not be evaluated any more harshly by others that are seeking to help them on their walk of faith. We shouldn't do anything that hinders the walk of faith for anyone, including elders' kids. And here's how it's reflected. They walk in the door. Man, where you been? Great to see you. Kind of missed you the last three Sundays. Is it an inappropriate thing to ask of anyone? Not necessarily. But is it getting asked of everyone else? No. It's getting asked of the elder's kid because his daddy's an elder. That's placing an additional burden on that child's walk of faith that I think is inappropriate. This is where I'm being a little direct, right? If there is a question about a child's faithfulness, they are important to ask. To whom should they be asked? The elder. or the prospective elder. And if you can't trust their response about whether their child is faithful, well, then you've got other questions to ask of that individual, right, Robert?
Just real quick, can it be that sometimes you could probably think something that might not be true? You know what I'm saying?
All the time.
And so you may, there might be some assumptions in your head that's not so.
Well, we're going to talk about this more next week. Yep. Appreciate your comments.